Hello, and welcome to 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. I'm your host, Rachel Vogel, and joining us for tonight's episode is Dylan Brewer, Vice President of Marketing and Head of Experiential at Epic Records. Dylan began his career fresh out of college working at Google in music partnerships. While there, he worked with artists like Ariana Grande, Sam Smith, Jennifer Lopez, the 1975, and many others. His next move was working for Def Jam Recordings, most significantly working with Justin Bieber on his Purpose album. Ultimately, he pivoted his passion to focus on creative direction and experiential marketing, thus landing him at Epic in 2018. Since then, he spearheaded marketing strategy for artists like Madison Beer, Beam, Jay Huss, and the one and only Ozzy Osbourne. To top it all off, Dylan received Clio recognition for the largest global release event in rock and roll history, Ozzy's Ordinary Man album, which saw listening parties at tattoo shops in 57 cities worldwide. So, with all that said, Dylan, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Rachel. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Okay, so Dylan, before I get started, I don't normally do this, kind of throwing you on the spot here. But before we jump into the first question, would you mind giving the audience a little more information on what experiential marketing is and specifically within the music industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's certain labels that, if you're talking about the label business, from my understanding, there's certain labels who focus more they focus more on that, and it's a dedicated role, right? Like I believe Warner has sort of an artist and fan experiences um, department that I think does a lot of that. The role that I have, I sort of created at Epic, so it wasn't so much of a dedicated thing necessarily. I know other sort of like sub labels have incubators that kind of create these sort of things, but I mean, to me, experiential marketing is anything that allows the fans to engage with their favorite artists in person in a live setting that's not like at a show, right? And
Right.
so that the artist can be there, the artist may not be there, but it's coming up with unique ways to sort of push the boundaries on what that experience looks like. For me personally, I always like to sort of try to focus on what haven't seen before. Um, so like it could be anything from like artist showcases, right? For new artists. That's a very typical thing in the label business, is to like showcase a new artist, bring out industry, that whole thing. But I found those to be very like plug and play, and they use the same venues and they're kind of boring. And so that's like the low hanging fruit of creating that, right? Because the label's doing that, and it's for those partners and what have you. But then it could be anything from release parties, which are also a very popular thing, pop-ups, things like that. And then you start engaging with, their merch companies and potentially their booking agents. But I think there's a lot of different things. Any sort of out of home marketing, which traditionally is just like your billboards, etc., can be considered experiential if you create a fan moment around it. I mean, there's a lot of different sort of verticals for it, but I think for me personally, I've always been excited about sort of playing and experimenting with the context around what the artist is, and really giving the artist a fun sort of like dream world or fantasy idea. Like I say, like creating a Disney World for the artist, right? Like, uh, if you have the Tyler, the Creators, and the Post Malones and people doing their own festivals, right? What is that on a one-off scale, right? Or what is it in a place where it's not just the performance that is the experiential part? So a lot, sort of a loaded answer, but it's certainly something new at Epic, and it's great to have created the role and put more emphasis into it.
That's great. Thanks so much for that. It sounds like you're just touching the surface. I'm excited to see what you do with it. Alrighty, we'll get down to business, what we're really here for. So, question number one, imagine for a second you're sitting down with your 25-year-old self. What one piece of advice would you give him on a personal note? And what one piece of advice would you give him from a business perspective?
So when I was 25, this is actually a good time for this question. I know this time very vividly because I was still in New York City, and it was right before I moved to LA. And it was at a point in this business where my patience was very much tested. I mean, I can really go into like a lot of my feelings at this moment.
Please do. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I think generally, and I think a lot of people experience this, but an after effect of being in the music industry is that it is easy to become jaded and loot, when you see behind the scenes and you see how things move, and this differs with everyone. For me, I can only talk about my opinion, right? It's like I loved the the art form, the culture, like all of that meant a lot to me. And I wanted to be as close to the art as possible. I wanted to create my own art in the form of events, in the form of, you know, directing video, whatever it was.
Right.
So there's a point in this industry that kind of slaps you across the face if you have that mindset, and you could lose the magic really easily. And I've seen people, I've seen that magic lost with people, and the fun sort of deteriorates, and it's supposed to be the most fun industry. And I think that age for me was like the pinnacle of me being really like some days depressed, some days super anxious, some days being like, what am I doing here? I
Mm.
was super tight on cash. Um, I didn't see a way out, I felt very like sort of trapped in a way, which I think happens to anyone, who's trying to fight to do stuff, and whether in the music industry or beyond. I mean, I think it's funny. I think back about it a lot now that I've sort of come out the other side, in a sense, not just like moving, but like you become a bit more comfortable financially,
Mhm.
and you find a groove, while it's happening you're like, this is going to happen forever. I remember that feeling like very vividly. So it's like I don't know if I would give any advice. I think it's more of like, for personal reasons, it's like, and I was trying to tell myself this as much as possible, you know how can I reassure myself every day that it will get better, like
Right.
time where it gets better. I mean, I think that's probably like the deepest thought I had on the personal side of things.
It
I
gets
think on
better. That's important.
I get, yeah, maybe. I don't know. I feel like, you know, it's kind of it's a weird question because there's a time and place to learn everything. So it's like, I mean, this is kind of like the juxtaposition of a question like, what would you give your 10-year advice to 10-year? It's like, well, I wouldn't want to necessarily give them any advice because there's something that I feel like you should learn about that
Right.
moment, that a certain thing, right? The sort of like answer that's like held on the pedestal business wise is kind of goes back to my first part, the jaded part of it, and being like, you control your narrative in this business. um you can manage, and it goes hand in hand, personal and business, right? So it's kind of like the answers are for both, right? It's like that you dictate your job, the job doesn't dictate you. And that's across the board, whether you have a really strict boss or not a strict boss, or you're micromanage or whatever. You ultimately decide how you want to own your job. And some people have more freedom in their roles than others, But when I was like very jaded by some of the people I worked with, I was like, these people are morons. Why do they have the titles they have? This is insane. Like, how did they make it this far? And then I had to flip the script a little bit and be like, I can come in every day and have a super negative attitude towards these people, or I can have this control and this ability to manage what the reality is and
Mhm.
play it, as an advantage to myself. you know there were times where I always make the analogy, and it's kind of like extreme, but like the puppeteer of the, you know what I mean? It's like if these are the kind of people that are going to act this way, then how can I play chess and like sort of make them do what I want them to do,
Right.
right? If I'm trying to create something, if I'm trying to get them to care about something, and these are like deeper questions about the reality of the industry. But yeah, it was like I'm in a circus. I might as well be, the whatever you call it, the ringleader, right?
Right.
Or I'm just another clown. Like if I give in to them, I'm also a clown with them. So am
Hmm.
I going to be the ringleader or the clown? And I think that moment happened around that age, but it grew into my, into now, I'm 30, so it was like only 5 years ago.
Hmm.
But I think that's ultimately the the advice I would give. I wish I would have had more of that strength and control and confidence and self-awareness when I was younger, obviously, because then I could maybe do, maybe it would have been more expansive now, right? But again, it goes back to my original thing. I I got to a certain place now because of the way you go through something, right?
Hmm.
So it's very easy and again, it depends on what your motive is at work. Some people are motivated to just do well by their boss. Some people are motivated just to keep the job. Most people are motivated by um, just, getting by. Some people are
Hmm.
motivated by creating cool shit. And that's like what I care about. And it's easy in this position to lose faith or inspiration when you're not the artist, you know?
Right.
I'm not the artist. I'm creating things for other people at the end of the day. I can think my ideas are the greatest ideas in the world, and then they just don't do them. I'm like, you're crazy. You're like, this is a, so it's like stuff like that. It's like a humbling thing. It's another piece of advice, and then we can move on. As long answer
No, please.
is the ability. Actually, this is good because I had this recently. The ability to not get too attached to your own ideas, right?
Hmm.
There's a feeling you have, there's this momentum you have when you're in a creative mindset that feels so amazing, right? You're like, this is so unique, this is so different. If you engage in that and you care about that and it drives you, it's a really fulfilling thing. And then it's like being a songwriter or an artist like itself, where you have that moment and then you sort of feel depleted. Like I'll have like a 3 hour long moment where I'm like, oh my God,
Right.
references. Like, boy, like I'm calling people and it's like I do it and I'm like, it's like my whole heart got poured into it, right?
Uh-huh.
Because I felt so emotional in that process that I hold on to it later for the artist or the manager to tell me, nah, we don't like that idea.
Right.
I'm like, damn. So it would affect me. I'd be like, fuck you. Like that feeling. I'd be like, fuck this, fuck you. You don't know what you're talking about. This is like I literally done everything, you know what I mean?
Especially
So
because it's dropped in like an instant.
yeah, yeah. And it's again, I'm not here just to do like I'm here to create cool ideas for the world,
Hmm.
and you might just be the pipeline, right? The
Right.
artist may just be the pipeline. I could have a
Hmm.
different perspective and be like, here are ideas I think that are good for you. You know, do I think they're cool ideas for the world? Maybe not. Right. So I think what I learned was, okay, how can I balance still maintaining that time frame of passion in the ideating and that freedom. It is pure freedom,
Hmm.
whether it's with yourself or other people. Usually it's with other people in the room. And you're like, in that moment, it's like during, it's like in the middle of a sports game. Like you're so into it, you're not even thinking about anything else. Instead of being so attached to that, the other side of the sort of, balancing whatever mechanism is, how can I embrace the idea of, well, I'm much better than one idea. If I'm so great at marketing and so great like if I like to pride myself in being creative or people say that to me or whatever, then I should be able to churn out 10 more of the same thing. Right.
Right.
And that's what's been more challenging to me and what I I would let affect me more often earlier on, where now I'm like, I find more pride in being like, if I want to be the best in creative direction and experiential and marketing, I better have 30 more ideas where that came from,
Right.
and I can move a little bit faster and but still have those moments of like it's all emotional management, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then again, on top of that, there's another thing where it's like there's moments maybe in the past where, for my role, you have a certain roster of artists, right? And the reality is that, people say don't be biased, but you may lean more towards one artist, like
Right.
naturally. It's just the reality of it. I don't care. People lie to you if they say, all artists are like innately, if you do really, if you care about this shit, then you're gonna feel more towards one artist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So before, if there was an artist, like I just would put a different kind of energy towards them in the sense of like, I'm gonna do this for them. It's what I said before. The idea is for them, everything for them. It wouldn't be less work, but I wouldn't tap into that energy, my own energy, you know? And so now I found out like if this is an artist who's like music is maybe just not my vibe, not my style, not my friend group style, like that I live by day to day, the inspiration, the thing I tapped into was like, well, how can I get my friends to actually fuck with this then? Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm identifying a circle that this artist doesn't appeal to initially. So if I'm really a dope marketer, I should be able to connect this crazy dot. And if I can get my friend in 6 months to be like, oh, this artist, yeah, music's all right, but like this one thing he does is tight. Like, this is dope, Like if I could bring it back to something that's innately like culturally relevant to me, then that's also a win, right? So there's certain things I've learned with how I approach certain artists and ideas and what have you that allow me to keep that flame as like fiery as possible and not
Mm-hmm.
just be like, okay, do my thing, do my thing, do my thing, do my thing. It's like, nah, I really want to go all in on everything. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, that was great. I think I have to leave it at there because you said it all. All right.
So
Moving right into question number two. Every industry has its dirty little secrets, and we both know it's no different in the music industry. And sometimes people think that's a bad thing, but that's not always the case. Sometimes they can be good. What's one secret you would like to share with our listeners about the industry?
does it have to be a good one?
It could be a bad one,
It's interesting that you preface it with it doesn't always have to be bad, but it can be
but it
good.
could be.
These are really good questions.
They
Um,
really make you think.
yeah, trying to think. There's like I don't want to be. I inherently don't want to be negative. Um, okay, it's not really I guess it's not really a secret, and it is positive. And I think a lot about what the music, even inside of entertainment industry, like what the music industry, how it really differs from other industries. And the thing I mention a lot is the like our product is a person. And again, not everyone has this approach, but if you're in my role when you work with artists directly, it's like alongside, essentially the A&Rs or the people who are making the music, and there's like that's the art form, and there's the emotional ball right there, like you're as close as possible to it. There is a deep psychological process when working with the most vulnerable people in the world, you know? And sometimes I am the artist's friend. Sometimes I'm the artist's label person. Sometimes I'm the artist's creative director. Sometimes I'm the artist's therapist. Sometimes and I love that. It's not for everyone. People are like, I'm not good at but the thing that I love about that is that it's taught me endless amounts of empathy for people, right? When you're tapped into extreme vulnerability, the result is extreme empathy. And I've been able to take that empathy and apply it to a lot of other factors of my life, all relationships that I have, my family, my friends,
Mhm.
and I don't think I would have gotten the same sort of thing. I wouldn't have felt a certain sort of way, I wouldn't have had as much self-awareness, as much growth in emotional intelligence if it wasn't for working in this business, you know? And it's totally changed the way I like how I think about people. Um, and again, I think it's a byproduct of just who I also am, because there's people in this business that don't have the role to have to do that. There's a
Mm-hmm.
different sort of set of things. But when you're so close to the product and so close to the artist, and you care and get passionate about it, like if you act like a 5-year-old, as I think we all should when we're in this business sometimes, then all sort of societal depictions of people, of creativity, of moments kind of go out the window, you know. There's something weirdly beautiful in that one little space and time, whether you're in the studio, whether you're in that conversation, or there's a freedom
Mm-hmm.
that really get into it, you know. Like people can be yelling at each other, like it's like you could really see, and maybe that part probably like exists in other industry, you know, just generally a industry that is fueled by passion for art and art form of expression.
Mm-hmm.
uh, there's really unique experiences from that, and that's the positive. And
Okay.
that's what I is what that kind of ties into the like, and again, I want to speak to your audience because you know it's geared towards like, you know, younger folk who want to come into the industry. Like that answer also applies to like, why are you in the industry? You know,
Mm-hmm.
what's the greatest thing that you've learned? What's the best experience? You know, stuff like that. Those two answers, they sort of go hand in hand. And so I think when you tap into that and leverage it and realize its power, um, then that's the secret. The secret
Mm-hmm.
is to remember to, you know, have fucking fun, because you're gonna have more fun in this industry than any other industry, period. So don't fuck it up.
Absolutely. Great answer. Alrighty. So, believe it or not, we're at the last question. So, let's get into it. Throughout your career, I can only imagine you've been asked a lot of questions, whether for industry conferences, the media, or even a promotion. But throughout all of those interviews and all of those questions, I'll bet there was one that you've never been asked but would have liked to. So, what is that question and what would be the answer?
These are crazy questions. This
Took some
question.
time. Took some time to come up with them.
It's a very meta question in itself. You're like, if you could be asked a question,
Yeah.
what would be asked? And I'm like, well, this one, but you just asked it. I want to give a good answer to. Like the question that would warrant a good answer.
Could be anything, anything in the world.
I think it would be okay, let me try to. I would say I don't know what the question would be necessarily, but I'd want it to be from like a young person, like a 4-year-old, you know.
Okay. That's a unique perspective. Haven't heard that one yet.
You know, because I like, you know, that like the young girl who interviews the rappers. Have you seen that?
Uh-huh.
Like
Yep.
she just interviewed Kendrick Lamar like
Mm-hmm.
backstage at whatever festival it was, Rolling Loud, or maybe, I don't know. There's just like innocence to it. So whatever the little girl or boy who's like 5 years old or whatever would want to ask me, that's probably that would warrant the greatest answer. Like, and we could just go back and forth. But ultimately, a like a child, so to speak, who is completely free of all perspectives of this business, right? Can ask me something really honest and genuine
True.
because there is no other understanding. So that, to me, and it could be sort of any question, but I think if the world would be sort of like, how would you see, and maybe some people have asked me this, but I've probably told more people my answer like without them even asking the question. I just tell them, is like, how would you uh create the music version of Disney World, right? Like how would you create something that doesn't exist now? You know,
Hmm.
what do you envision? What would be
Right.
exciting to you? What artist would you bring along? You know, it's like if you had to start the first, and let's just say festival for the sake of like that is the main structure of the closest thing to Disney World right now, is like the artist festivals. It's like Flognaw and like,
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. If you had to start the first one like on Mars, what artists are you bringing and what does it look like? You know,
Mm-hmm.
and I would try to tap into like an answer like that a Prince would give, or like a David Bowie would give, or like a Kanye West would give, like that. I would want my answer to be at that iconic level.
All
So whatever
right.
question warrants an answer that I could be like, this is, but it would be something along the lines of like vision for the live space. How does like, how do we see that, like the future of live shows or whatever it may be? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But from a 5-year-old.
Right. Of course. That's a great question. All right. Well, Dylan, it has been wonderful having you on 3Q tonight. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat. And to all of my listeners, I know you enjoyed hearing from Dylan just as much as I enjoyed speaking with him. So stay tuned for next week's episode of 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. See you next time.